Hello and bonjour, I am Sarah Bukhari and you're watching Power Dilemmas at TAGTV. Canada arrested 70 asylum seekers at US-Canada border. Justin Trudeau said that it is not his responsibility to lecture Donald Trump on the immigration policy. So viewers, as the scenario of the travel ban rapidly erupts, there are so many things connected to it. Travel ban, an executive order, the problems with the executive order. 7 majority Muslim countries' citizens are barred to enter the US. What are the things connected? What are the consequences connected with that? To talk about this and more, we have in our studios immigration lawyer, the renowned immigration lawyer, Chantal Delage. Welcome to my show, Chantal.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you so much, first of all, to come to my show. The first question I'm going to ask you is, what is this travel ban Donald Trump has ordered?
Right. So one of the very first things that Donald Trump did when he took office is he issued an executive order, which is a directive that comes from the president that is not voted on in the Congress. It has to do with national security. So it did several things. He first of all enumerated 7 majority Muslim countries from which all travel to the U.S. Would be banned from the date of the order for a period of 90 days. And the idea was that during that 90 days, the president would figure out what he really wanted to do on a long-term basis with respect to national security issues. The second thing that the travel ban did was it blocked Syrian refugees indefinitely from entering the United States, even if they had been through the entire visa process, even if they had been approved and vetted by security and everything, they would be banned from entering the United States indefinitely. And third, it put a 120-day hold on refugees in general from those 7 countries from entering the United States for 120 days.
Okay, so the situation right now for Muslims from these countries is, could they enter the U.S. or they're still barred to enter the U.S.? What is their situation?
So
what should they do?
Currently, there is a temporary restraining order that the courts have placed on the operation of the executive order because there were some parties in the United States that mounted a constitutional challenge to the travel ban and successfully argued in the court that there is at least a basis for a case of challenging the constitutionality. So they brought basically an injunction in the U.S. court, and they were successful in stopping the travel ban.
Okay, so what is going to be next? There was 7th of February, there was a public hearing. What are we going to see next? What are the next steps?
Right. So after the temporary restraining order was upheld in the appeal court in the United States, President Trump had a few different options. He could either decide to give up, which clearly is not an option in his dictionary. He could also decide to take the challenge further, possibly to the Supreme Court. Or he could simply redraft a new executive order. And initially what he said he was going to do is he was going to appeal it up higher. He put out a tweet saying, "See you in court," which was an expression of his interest to keep appealing it higher. However, the latest news is that he has decided not to do that, and instead he's going to issue a new executive order, and we're expecting that to come down next week.
Okay, is he planning to take this travel ban back? What are the possibilities?
Well, nobody knows what he's going to do, and I think this is going to be very interesting to see what happens next week, because either he could try to tone down the travel ban, try to bring it within the realm where people could not challenge the constitutionality of it, or knowing his personality, he may decide to take it even further. Nobody knows what he's going to do, but it should be highly entertaining.
Okay, so there are 7 Muslim majority countries, citizens which are banned. What is the repercussions of the Pakistani citizens or Pakistani-born, Canadian-raised citizens or having dual citizenship?
Right. So in the initial executive order, Pakistan was not named among those 7 countries. And it was interesting because President Trump said that the purpose of the executive order was to prevent terrorism and national security, and it was couched in the terms of 9/11 and all of those things. But the 7 countries that were named in the order, no citizen of any of those countries had ever committed an act of domestic terrorism in the United States. And citizens of countries that had committed domestic acts of terrorism in the United States were not put on the ban. For example, citizens of Saudi Arabia, citizens of Pakistan, citizens of Egypt, countries that actually had been involved historically in incidents in the U.S. They were not named in the order.
Okay, so do you think in future there could be things connected to Pakistan or Saudi Arabia?
It's possible, but I mean, it's a highly political decision. The U.S. has to be very careful diplomatically on an international scale, not to annoy people who are allied with them overseas. I think that the 7 countries that he put on the travel ban were probably the low-hanging fruit, the people that it was easy to pick on because the U.S. doesn't have strong diplomatic ties with them in the first place.
So Trump tweeted on February the 9th, see you in the court. The security of the U.S. is at stake. What do you have to make out of the statement?
Well, again, part of the problem that he had in court was that he could not make any rational connection between those 7 countries and the actual national security of the United States. And one of the appeal court judges during the hearing, I listened to the entire hearing, one of them challenged him and said, well, to the government lawyer, and said, where is your evidence that nationals of these 7 countries have ever done anything in the U.S. to make them the subject of this travel ban? And the government lawyer could not point to one single example to uphold it. So, I mean, there doesn't seem to be any rational connection between the 7 countries that were named and the objective of protecting national security. What would have made more sense is if he had targeted the ban towards nationals of countries that had actually created problems in the U.S. before.
Exactly, because not all Muslims are terrorists. That is the argument. And yes, there is Islamist terrorists coming out, and I think it's what kind of a stance is he taking? I don't understand that.
Yeah, well, it's difficult to say. I mean, I guess we'll know more next week. But I mean, in the court, one of the arguments that the government made was that we're not targeting Muslims because these 7 countries make up probably 15% of the world's population of Muslims. And there are many Muslim nations that are not on the travel ban. Therefore, you can't prove that we're targeting Muslims. And what the challenging lawyer said was, well, yes, but you can tell from the intent behind the executive order that it was racist in nature because of the statements that Donald Trump had made during his campaign saying we're going to ban Muslims from entering the country. And that statement actually came back to haunt him in the appeal court.
Okay. What are the repercussions for Canada now? People are going to face Canada to seek asylum, seek the refugee status.
Right. So everything that's happening in the United States right now is creating a climate of fear amongst people who are either there illegally or are asylum seekers. And even if you're not from one of those 7 countries, there have been examples of people from other countries, for example, Morocco, which was never on the travel ban, having problems at the U.S. border and being, arguably mistreated by U.S. border guards. So this is creating a climate of fear in the U.S. and it's driving asylum seekers to seek another alternative because they're no longer convinced that they will get a fair hearing in the U.S.
Okay, because Canada has welcomed refugees last year. How many were there? 3,000 refugees?
Oh, no.
From Syria?
From Syria? No, there were many, over 40,000 actually from Syria.
40,000, okay.
Yeah.
I need to correct my statistics there. So, and Canada has hailed that it is the best place for refugees and asylum seekers. What is Justin Trudeau going to, what is his stance on how is he going to deal with Trump's travel ban?
Well, I think Prime Minister Trudeau has taken a pretty reasonable stance on this, which is I'm not going to get involved. It's not really our place to tell the United States what to do in terms of their domestic or foreign policy. And we're dealing with a new president. So, there's a lot of things that are still unknown as to how the Canada-U.S. relationship will develop. So I think that the government is probably going to just maintain the status quo, not change any of our rules in response to what the U.S. is doing until we know more information.
Okay, so there is some exception granted to green card holders. Could you enlighten our viewers on that, please?
Right. So when you read the executive order, when it first came out, I printed out a full copy of it and I read it word for word. What the executive order said is that if you are from one of those 7 countries, you had a travel ban to the U.S. It did not say if, you know, it doesn't apply to dual nationals from Canada. It didn't say that it doesn't apply if you're a green card holder. It just said if you were from one of those countries, you could not travel to the U.S. That's a very broad, sweeping statement. So in the days that followed, the Trump administration had to issue several clarifications of what they meant under the travel ban. So the first thing they said was, no, it doesn't apply to Canadian citizens. Well, the executive order didn't actually say that, but then they came out and clarified that's not what we meant. Then after that, they issued an exception under the executive order saying we're not going to apply the travel ban to people from one of those 7 countries if they are a U.S. green card holder.
Okay.
So there was an exception issued for them.
So the green card holders in the U.S. should not be scared if they are from these 7 Muslim countries?
Well, I'm not sure if they should be scared or not, because the executive order did issue an exception to it. So clearly it's not meant to apply to them. But I think the issue is that this whole issue of the executive order has created a climate at the border where officers feel like they have permission to give people a bit of a hard time. And we've had several highly publicized examples which have been in the news recently of people who were just minding their own business. The travel ban didn't apply to them, but they were still bounced back from the border. There was a young man from Morocco, not even born in Morocco. His parents were born in Morocco, was turned back from the U.S. border. He's a Canadian citizen. There was another woman, I forget which country she's from, but again, not a country that's under the travel ban, bounced back from the U.S. border because she had videos of Muslim prayers on her phone. And the officers didn't know what that was. It made them nervous, and they turned her back for that simple reason. So should green card holders be comfortable? I wouldn't, because it seems like they're making it up as they go along right now.
It looks like it's a huge backlash, which is trickling down at the border services agent
Yes.
and the border with the custom agents.
Yeah.
How would the Muslims living in the U.S., whether they are from these 7 Muslim countries or from other Muslim countries, how should they be taking this news?
I wish that they would not be nervous, but I wouldn't blame them if they are right now. I just had a phone call yesterday from a gentleman in the United States, not affected directly by the travel ban, but a Muslim from another country, who contacted me, had been living in the United States for a very long time, American citizen, and was now at a later stage of life saying, I am not comfortable anymore as a Muslim in the United States. I would like to move to Canada, and wondering about the immigration policies. And I was quite surprised, because this is someone who is not affected by the travel ban, an American citizen, not comfortable.
So do you think, is the American dream over?
No, I wouldn't go that far. I think there's going to be a bumpy ride for a little while, but ultimately, this too will pass. The Constitution of the United States is strong. The judiciary is obviously upholding that Constitution, and they're taking their job very seriously. Trump cannot do whatever he wants. He can issue executive orders, but ultimately he is subject to the jurisdiction of the court and the Constitution of the United States.
Do you think this executive order and maybe something else related to immigration could create the stage for Trump's impeachment?
That is a possibility. I mean, I think that a lot more would have to happen between now and then in order for the United States to take that very drastic step. But it could be going down that road. I'll tell you, I was completely shocked at the way, the incompetent way that the executive order was rolled out. It's one thing to make an order which is shocking to most of the world, but it's another thing to roll out that order on a Friday, not brief your border guards, not brief your Department of State as to what the executive order is supposed to mean. So over the weekend, you were having, the Department of State was saying it applies to Canadian citizens. The National Security Advisor was saying, no, it doesn't apply to Canadian citizens. That level of confusion, I mean, it really shows how green the administration is and how unused they are to running a government.
At this time, we would like to take a small break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Power Dilemmas here with Sarah Bukhari at TAGTV. We are interviewing our very wonderful guest, Chantal Delage, and we are talking about the Trump travel ban, how it's going to affect Canada-US relations, the status of the asylum seekers in Canada. So let's continue our very good talk with Chantal. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay, Chantal, let's talk about the safe third-party agreement. What is this safe third-party agreement? And let's enlighten our viewers on this.
Right, so a Safe Third Country Agreement is basically a treaty between Canada and the U.S., which means that if an asylum seeker comes to Canada or comes to the U.S., they can't cross the border and then make an asylum claim in the other country. So if someone were to travel to the U.S. and want to come to Canada and make their asylum claim, they're normally not allowed to do that unless they fall under one of the exceptions of the agreement. And there are a number of exceptions. For example, if you have certain family members who are already in Canada, then that will allow you to circumvent the agreement. There is also an exception that it only applies at the border point. So if you've come into the airport, or if you've come to the bridge at Niagara Falls, for example, and you report to Border Services, the Safe Third Country Agreement applies to you, and you would not normally be allowed to make a claim in Canada if you came through the U.S. However, if you manage to cross the border in some other way, whether you came in as a tourist, for example, or you crossed the border illegally, we've heard stories of people coming through in the middle of the night in the winter. If you manage to reach Canadian soil first and then go back and make your refugee claim, you are allowed to do that. So that's what's motivating this rash of asylum seekers that are sneaking across the border, even though it's very cold in winter conditions, in Quebec, in Manitoba, where there are long stretches of border where there's no border guards. If you can manage to cross into Canada, you would be allowed to make an asylum claim, even if normally the Safe Third Country Agreement would apply to you.
Okay, so and this is kind of the gist of how Canada is treating with the asylum seekers coming from the U.S.
Exactly.
That is at the base of the asylum seekers.
Exactly. And so what we've heard, obviously, is that people are risking their lives. I mean, Manitoba in the middle of the winter is not a funny thing. If you're going to be wandering around in farmers' fields for 20 hours, people could die. So the Safe Third Country Agreement, it does have that loophole in it, and people are obviously aware of that if they come to the proper border crossing, they won't be allowed to come in and make an asylum claim. But if they can somehow get across on their own, then they will be able to.
Okay. Chantal, let me take you to the next week's another president's executive order. What are the expectations tied to the executive order, which Trump is expected to announce next week?
Well, he's keeping it very quiet. So he has not issued even a whisper to hint at what's coming down the pipe. So nobody knows whether it's going to be a toned down executive order to try not to get another constitutional challenge, or whether it will be even more far reaching than the previous executive order, because his personality is such that he tends to go to extremes. So I honestly would not be surprised if he went to try to go even further next week. I think everyone's on pins and needles waiting to see what's going to happen, but I think we're going to be in for more court challenges in the near future.
Okay, wonderful, Chantal. Amazing having you here.
Thank you.
I hope to have you again. Thank you very much, viewers, for watching Power Dilemmas here with Sarah Bukhari. And today we talked about the evolution of the Trump travel ban and what are the expectations and how are people being affected by it. Next time we will come with another topic. Stay tuned to Power Dilemmas here at TAGTV. Thank you and bye-bye.
#1 multicultural channel. This is TAGTV.